Do it like 20 minutes and then Q&A.
I guess we may
Alright.
about, I guess that makes sense. In my problem, I think what I'm going to read, it's going to be from the next book, so it'll be shorter than 20 probably, I guess.
All right, I haven't actually timed myself doing this. I'm going to do like 3 scenes. I'm hoping to come in under 20.
Okay.
Because I also have to do a little context. So.
Okay, cool. All right, well then, hi everyone. I am not David Mack. He's the lesser portion.
Wow.
Wow. I didn't even have to specify. Just, no.
I wondered what you'd go first.
Yeah, I am going to go first. My name's Gregory Wilson, and I'm going to read a section. This is, I think, the second time only that I've done this. My first novel in the Grey Assassin trilogy was The Greenwood Group, came out last year, Gray Shade. And the second book is called Renegade, and that is going to be due out in a couple of months. So I thought, since it may be a little bit more fun for the gaming general crowd, that I would read the prologue for that. So this is not yet out. It is an exclusive sneak peek, as it were. It is not super long, but that will give David a chance for his full context of everything about World War II afterwards. So this is the prologue to Renegade, and it discusses something about Gray Shade, this kind of cover. The snows would come with a fury. Sweeping west from the worm spires over the Skara Blade into Nornar, the wind would cover the villages and towns and their sometimes complacent residents in a retributive blanket of white. Everyone in Elskeg said so, and most of them had seen enough winters to make the claim credible. But the snows had not yet come. And in truth, if one had fallen asleep for months and suddenly woken now, they could be forgiven for believing it was still summer, even if it was barely 2 months until the turning of the year. It was hot enough that the workers trudging back from the iron reaches were sweating by the time they reached Elskeg, even in the evenings. Hot enough that I'll take this swill that passes for ale, thought Ress sourly as he took another deep drink of Diamond Tier brew from the stained wooden mug in front of him and sighed. Everyone in Elskeg also said that the water here was more pure than the center of the Skara Blade, and gods knew that was a lie to end all the others. But at least it was cold, which was a mercy in itself. Ress sat at a table in the almost empty common room in the Mountain's Heart, one of 2 taverns in Elskeg and by far its oldest. The other, the Lady in Feather, had only been in Elskeg for 2 years, and by all accounts had taken over much of the Mountain's Heart's business, a bigger fire, better ale, and according to rumor, other services. That might explain why finding a seat, or a room, there in the evenings was well nigh impossible. But even if there had been 100 free chairs, Ress would likely have avoided the Feather in any event. The Mountain's Heart had been a fixture in his evenings for 2 decades, and he'd be damned if a pretty face and a more palatable drink would sway him from it. Besides, the Heart's bartender, Gallard, was always nicer to him on paydays, and as Ress looked over at the mostly full bag of coin sitting near his mug, he knew he would have a few more hours of as much Diamond Tier brew as he could stomach. He had just allowed himself the smallest of smiles when the front door to the tavern flew open, smashing against the interior wall with a bang as 2 men stumbled into the room. Ress's smile vanished as he saw the uniform they were wearing. That's what you get for thinking you've got everything under control, Ress. Ain't nothing stays the way you think it will. The 2 men, staggering more or less in the direction of the bar, wore leather armor, swords at their sides, shields on their backs, ordinary soldiers, by any reasonable account. But their tabards were decorated with green and gold, dominated by the image of a tree in full leaf, and covered in golden blooms, the colors of Galiskag. "Bartender!" the taller soldier shouted as they reached the bar, as if summoning him from the depths instead of the space 5 feet away from where the men stood. Gallard's sandy brown hair and dark eyes over a crooked smile nodded patiently, placing a mug he'd been drying on the counter. "Gentlemen," he replied, "warm night out. What can I—" "Ale!" the taller soldier roared. "Ale for the both of us, if you serve any in this outhouse you call a tavern." Gallard blinked, but his smile didn't waver, and without a word he took the mug from the counter and filled it from one of the barrels on the rack behind him, repeating the process with a second mug before placing both in front of the 2 men. The smaller soldier snatched his mug up and drank, some excess rolling down the sides of his dark beard. "Swill," he finally proclaimed, following up the observation with a loud belch. "Aye," the other agreed. "What else do you expect, Kester? We're hundreds of miles from anywhere with something real to drink." His bloodshot eyes scanned the tavern briefly, perhaps looking for potential signs of resistance, but with only Ress, Gallard, and old Kalish in the back corner of the room as a silent audience, he soon gave it up and turned back to his companion.
Never should have been out here in the first place. If the captain had done her job... Rennick, said Kester with something between a laugh and a cough. The captain ain't worth the armor she wears. Aye, but as I say, if she'd done her job, we wouldn't be here to begin with. Or if Corleskag bowed down the way they should have, Kester replied.
Ress's hand tightened around the handle of his mug.
We should have made him bow. Could have ended this stupid war months ago if we just marched straight to Corleskag and shown him what we do to traitors and scum that act above themselves.
Rennick drank deeply before continuing.
But no, we can't be foolish, the captain says. Got to fight smart, boys. Fuh!
He spat on the floor with gusto, ignoring Gallard's look of surprise.
Fighting smart ain't coming out here to knock sense into a bunch of half-breed sheep herders. We're wasting our time. Aye, replied Kester. Could have gotten things done even faster if Telsavar took our side the way it should have. Telsavar, snarled Rennick, slamming his mug down on the counter for emphasis. Telsavar ain't never taken any side but its own. Telsavar's happy to see us fight for what scraps it decides to leave us. And anyway, rumor has it Telsavar's leaders ain't the only ones calling the shots. They got others telling them what to do now from the shadows. I hear tell, he said, only slightly quieter, that when we're done sending Corleskag back to the depths, Telsavar's next. Ha, Kester scoffed. You're drunk, Rennick. Telsavar in a dying village like Corleskag. Enough for us to worry about giving Corleskag what it's been asking for.
Ress set his jaw.
It ain't worth it, he thought. Don't matter what a couple of drunkards have to say. Won't make a difference to us anyways, Rennick said. Either way, we're stuck out here, halfway between the cow lovers of Lorar and the dirt eaters of the depths. Gods know what I ever did to deserve being stationed in this dunghole.
He drained his mug and turned back to Gallard.
Another.
Certainly, Gallard said pleasantly enough, though Ress could tell his smile was now more than a bit strained. First ones will be 2 coins each, though. You gotta make sure we keep ahead of the tax collector, you know. He chuckled a bit at the joke, but Rennick did not return the laugh, digging into a small pouch in his belt. He fumbled around for a bit longer before pulling out a single coin.
Kester, throw in a couple for us, lad.
Kester raised an eyebrow.
With what? I ain't got a coin left after giving you something for your fun at the last tavern.
Rennick's red eyes blinked.
Ah, well...
He looked at Gallard, then back to Kester, and finally surveyed the room as Ress turned away, focusing his attention on his drink.
You!
He finally exclaimed. At first, Ress didn't respond, but when he heard footsteps drawing close, he looked up to see the 2 Galaskagian soldiers standing above him.
You don't talk?
Rennick asked. Ress didn't respond.
Well, I was talking to you,
Rennick said, his voice suddenly quieter.
Still am. Can't help noticing you got a pouch of money next to you. A lot more than you could ever spend unless I miss my guess. My friend and I seem to be a bit low on funds. We'd appreciate a bit of assistance.
Ress still said nothing, even though he felt his face growing hot. He simply shook his head and turned away.
Don't think you heard my friend here, Kester said more loudly. We need help and we aim to get it. Just a few coins will do. But you keep acting as dumb as you probably are, and we'll take the whole bag and leave you a few reminders of what you wouldn't give us willingly.
Now, gentlemen, Gallard said, coming out from behind the counter,
we can work out some... Shut your mouth, barkeep, Rennick said, cutting him off. We don't want to have to shut this place down, but we'll do it, if only to teach you dirt eaters what it means to have some respect. Now I'll ask one more time, old man. Coins!
Ress's knuckles were now white as they curled around the mug's handle.
Eat spit, he muttered.
Rennick laughed.
Oh, some spirit, eh? Well, that's something different for a change. It's nice to finally have someone around here show at least a bit of a spine.
With this last word, he grabbed Ress's shoulder and pulled him backwards hard, knocking his chair over and him with it.
Now you're going to give us the whole bag. And now we're going to teach you a lesson, he said, drawing his sword and standing over Ress as he struggled to pull himself to his feet.
I think he made it quite clear he wasn't interested in giving you any of his own money, Frank, a low voice said. All 3 men looked over to see a hooded figure standing alone in the shadows by the door. Ress couldn't remember seeing anyone else besides Gallard and Kalish in the common room. There was no second floor, and he would have heard the front door open for a newcomer, the way it had for Rennick and Kester. But there he stood, hands by his sides, eyes glinting in the reflected lantern light.
I don't recall asking you for an opinion, friend, Rennick said, a slight sneer playing over his face. In fact, I don't recall asking you for anything at all. So I'd keep your mouth shut and find another place to do your drinking. Those places seem to be hard to find around here, the stranger replied. Wherever I go, someone's ordering someone to do something they don't seem to want to do, and convincing them with a fist or a blade. It makes mealtimes unpleasant. It'd be a lot more unpleasant if you don't do what you're told, Kester said. Get out. Without bothering to see the result of the command, the two turned back to rest. Now that you've had the chance to think it through, let's have the... Rennick began as he lifted his sword, but his sentence ended with a yelp of pain as he staggered sideways, the blade clattering to the ground as he grabbed his wrist. Out of the corner of his eye, Rest saw a metallic ball roll over to rest against the table then. Kester and Rennick, still holding his wrist, turned to see the hooded man a step closer. I didn't think anyone here had fight left in him, Kester said, drawing his sword. It's too bad we ain't got more around to see what it looks like, or what happens when you show it to a Galaskagian soldier. Step off, Kester, Rennick hissed, crouching to pick up his sword from the ground as he watched the hooded man wear it. This Raylar waste is mine. He stood again, holding his blade in front of him. The hooded man remained motionless. I don't know why you think it's worth throwing your life away over an old dirt-eater like this, but you made your own choices. The stranger said nothing, and after a tense few seconds, Rennick pulled his sword back and charged towards it. Rest caught what might have been the glint of a smile from within the depths of the stranger's hood. Rennick swung as he reached the hooded man, but his swing passed through open air as the man was already gone, with cloak swirling. Rennick whirled to find the man behind him and swung again, but again the stranger had vanished. Snarling, Rennick turned, but even as he did so, something connected with his face, and with a grunt, Rennick fell heavily to the floor and lay motionless. The hooded man stood above him, holding a curved blade with the pommel outwards. For a moment there was dead silence. Then Kester ran at the man, sword above his head, shouting wildly. The stranger did nothing until the last second, when he stepped out of the way of the soldier and, though it happened so quickly Rest couldn't be entirely sure what he was seeing, pushed him towards the wall of the tavern. Kester ran into the wall with a sickening crunch, and without a word he toppled backward onto the ground, his sword sliding out of his nerveless hand at impact, and coming to a rest just a few inches from Ress's face. The whole business had taken, perhaps, 15 seconds. What in the hells? Ress crawled backwards along the floor, eyes wide, but the hooded man took no further notice of him. He picked up the metallic ball from the ground and placed it in his cloak. Then he tossed something to the equally stunned Galler, who seemed to catch the object out of reflex. It made a jingling sound, like a bag filled with coins. Then the stranger turned and left the tavern, the doors slamming shut behind him. For a few moments, Rest simply stared, his brain struggling to process the wild-eyed Kalish at the back table, the equally silent Galler looking dumbstruck at the bag in his hand, and the two unconscious Galaskagian soldiers. And then the thought came to him, urgent, overwhelming. That's your chance, you fool, and you're letting it walk away. Head aching, he scrambled to his feet, grabbed his bag from the table, and ran from the mountain's heart into the night, following the stranger and his hopes. That is the prologue, and you learn more in the rest of it.
When did you say that's coming out again?
Coming out in late October.
Cool.
Yes, I'm up. I'll be reading to you from a book called The Midnight Front. This is book one of a new series called Dark Arts that I have found from Tor. It has been a long time in the making. I've been a long time in the talking about it. It's coming out in just 5 months from now, January 30th, 2018. The book is set in World War II, and the basic premise is that the Nazis had sorcerers working for them, so the Allies decide they need their own team of sorcerers, so they create the Midnight Front, a top-secret magical warfare group. Our hero, Cade Martin, is a young American studying at Oxford when the war breaks out in 1939. He and his parents try to evacuate England. The Nazis sink the ship. His parents are killed. On a mission of vengeance, Cade becomes part of the Midnight Front. What he learns is that magic, true magic, works the way it says it does in the old 15th century grimoires. All magic is predicated on the conjuring and control of demons. And if you get it wrong, you die. There is no room for error with this kind of magic. Normally, I would read something about Cade, but I think I'm going to do something a little different today. These are some scenes from roughly the middle of the book, and these are going to focus on the four supporting characters who are the other members of the Midnight Front. One is Adair, who is the master of the group. Anya, who is a Russian woman, peasant-born, illiterate, but has learned magic the hard way over many years, and she's sort of Adair's favorite. And then there are the two senior apprentices. The first is named Stefan, and he is a gay man and also Jewish. He's from the Netherlands, and he is charged by Adair with a mission to recover a very important codex called the Iron Codex. So he's on a special mission by this point in the book, on his own, going into enemy territory undercover. And the other senior apprentice is named Nico Lebeau, and he is a man of French-Algerian descent, and he is sneaking back into France to try and reconnect with his family and the French resistance so that he could help them and destroy the enemy's magical covens that are throughout the occupied zone of France and Free France. The first scene is going to take place at a real place called Eilingdonen Castle, which is in Scotland. It's near the village of Dorning up in the Skye region of Scotland, the Highlands. And then the second scene will be in Germany, and the third scene will be in France. Knee-deep in snow on the lowest portion of the island, beneath the crenellated seawall, Anya focused on shattering large stones with a demonic whip, then melting the fragments in midair with blasts of hellfire. A single stone caromed off the wall of the keep's guardhouse and ricocheted over the lower seawall toward the loch. She split the fist-sized piece of falling rock with one arrow from the bow of Lorika. A voice at her back halted her practice. "Nice shooting." The master shed his invisibility and faded into view, hovering a few feet above the ground. Anya sulked at the intrusion. "I could have killed you." "That chance, but I'm glad you care." He drifted to the ground. His feet sank into the churned-up snow. "Up with the sun, are you?" "I never went to bed." The master nodded in understanding. "Can't sleep?" "Not for a few nights." She massaged her right temple, then looked his way. "And yes, I tried absinthe, and no, I don't want the opium." "You've got 8 spirits yoked. A touch of the poppy could take the edge off." Anya shook her head. "It does bad things to me, and it took me weeks to quit last time." She studied Adair. "This is not what you came to discuss." "No." He seemed uncomfortable. "You're supposed to help me train Cade." She searched the grounds for a new target against which to unleash her fury. "He does not need my help." With an invisible hand, the master spun her to face him. "I need to know that I can trust you in battle." The implications of his demand stung her. "How can you ask me that? After all I have done, all I have lost, you would question my loyalty?" "I don't fear for myself, lass. I'm worried you won't protect him." Her denial soured into contempt. "Let him save his own skin." "Not good enough, my dear." "Why not?" "Because He stopped himself, regrouped. "Because we need him, and he needs us." He trudged through the snow to hold Anya by her shoulders. "This is bigger than you or me. Cade's our best hope of winning this war, but not if we fail him." "I think he will fail us. Good in the circle is not the same as good in battle, and he is not that good in the circle." Adair's patience waned. "He made one mistake, and you stopped it. He's done well since then. He's already mastered the basics." "The basics? We need to fight a war against an enemy with much greater numbers, and you want me to risk my life with an amateur at my side?" The master regarded her with incredulity. "And what are you, a seasoned veteran?" "Not in war, but I know more magic, and at least I have shed blood." He cupped his right hand over the scar on her left cheek, his affect suddenly mild. I know." His touch calmed her. Then he looked her in the eye. "But I need to know you won't turn your back on him out there, or lead him into danger." She suppressed her envy. "I did not betray your other special students." No, but you were never so hostile to them either. Why cave? You tell me. Why did you risk us all to save him that night at sea? Why make me spend so much time working to free him from Leviathan's curse? I have my reasons, lass. Let that satisfy you. It didn't, but his tone made it clear he was no longer willing to suffer questions. Wary of his wrath, she changed the subject. Is he ready for combat? Some blades need to be proved in action. They either break or draw blood. A sigh. What I do know is we can't wait any longer. Tula Society covens are spreading like a cancer. If we don't start carving them out now, the war is as good as over. He floated upward, parallel to the keep's wall, and called down to Anya as he levitated away. Pack a rock, lass, and travel light. We leave tonight at sundown. Realizing that the day for which she had so long prepared was upon her, she was filled with foreboding. Where are we going? His countenance was grim. To war. By the way, in case you haven't noticed, I lack Greg's facility for accents. Any time I attempt an accent, I wind up 2 countries to the left. Please imagine that Adair is Scottish and Anya has a Russian accent. I'm not going to do them because you will just anyway, so next scene. A shriek filled the train car as the brakes engaged. Momentum punched the passengers forward in their seats as the locomotive slowed to a halt, and Westphalia's bleak winterscape emerged from the blur of motion outside its windows. The late afternoon sky had faded to the color of a blanched peach. Long shadows and streaks of reflected light filled the streets of Hamburg. Stefan lowered his copy of Mein Kampf, a pandering choice of reactionary tripe he had only pretended to read during the ride south from Fehmarn. During his brief stay in Sweden, his contact had advised him to eschew his usual 3-piece suits in favor of a workman's clothes, so as not to draw attention. Her counsel had proved useful for his pre-dawn sea crossing by skiff into Denmark, and also afterward when he had been forced on short notice to slaughter an entire Tula Society coven at Copenhagen. After leaving Denmark by ferry and arriving in Fehmarn with forged papers, identifying him as a citizen of the Grossdeutschreich, Stefan had reverted to habit and attired himself in a suit of dark gray wool with a silk vest and tie. Some might have accused him of vanity, but he thought of it as playing his part. He had, after all, booked first-class accommodations all the way to Warsaw, from whence he planned to arrange alternative transportation to Krakow, the last known whereabouts of the Kabbalah masters who had vanished with Adair's precious grimoire. The plan was not without risk. It entailed traveling in public through 2 of Germany's largest cities, Hamburg, its principal seaport, and Berlin, its capital. Even so, Stefan had felt certain his disguise and persona were sufficiently nondescript as to let him pass without detection, a ghost by virtue of anonymity. Then 4 Gestapo entered the carriage behind his. The plainclothes officers headed his way. Stefan felt his confidence take flight. Alone and only moments away from a confrontation with the Nazis' secret police, he was no longer certain of anything. Do I run? Or trust in my papers? Though he'd made every effort to be inconspicuous, he was paralyzed by the fear he had missed something, some detail that would betray him, if not as a Jew, then as a homosexual or as an Allied spy. He feared the Nazis might search his bag and find the photos of him and Everett that he kept tucked away between the pages of a copy of Yeats's collected poems and discover the truth that seemed so evident in those images of happier times. In the next car, the Gestapo moved from one row of passengers to the next, demanding papers and asking questions. They moved in pairs, with each duo working one side of the aisle. Their black trench coats and fedoras were just as menacing as any SS trooper's uniform. Were it just one man, I could make his death seem an accident. But 4 of them? He stole another look over his shoulder and considered turning himself invisible. No, I have a passenger list. If I vanish, I might as well run. The moment I do, they'll start looking for me. He took a breath, but his heart refused to slow its mad tempo. A clatter announced the opening of the carriage's rear door. The 4 Gestapo marched to the closest row of occupied seats and began asking for passengers' papers. Acid crept up Stefan's throat. Sweat beaded on his forehead. In small motions, he mopped his brow with his handkerchief, then tucked it away. What if they arrest me? He had more than enough demonic power at his command to kill all 4 Gestapo. But how would he attenuate the consequences? If only I had yoked Fornius, I could erase the memories of the Nazis and the other passengers. It was an error of a mission he vowed to correct and never make again. But first he had to avoid being arrested or killed. Papers, please. Stefan forced a polite smile. Of course. He fished inside his suit coat, pulled out his papers, and handed them to the officer looming over him. The other 2 Gestapo moved down the aisle. The pair studying Stefan's papers lingered. Cupping their hands in front of each other's ears, they traded whispers. One of them hurried away with the forged papers, while the other remained at Stefan's side. The young Karsist affected his most humble demeanor. Is there a problem? Be quiet, said his new watchdog. Chancing a glance to his left, Stefan saw his Nazi minder drape his hand over the grip of the Luger semi-automatic on his hip. At the front of the carriage, the other 2 Gestapo continued forward, leaving Stefan's captor alone. Through the windows on the other side of the carriage, he saw the officer who had taken his papers confer with a knot of black-uniformed German SS. It took only a thought to set Stefan's escape in motion. In your heart, I struck you. Stefan pictured the invisible dagger of Orias piercing the Gestapo man's chest, and thus it was done. Without sound or fury, without blood or obvious wound, but a killing blow all the same. The officer crumpled to the floor of the train, clutching at his chest, his gesture a pantomime for the shredding of his cardiac muscle beneath his sternum. Stefan sprang to his feet. This man needs a doctor! In the moment between his declaration and the crush of charitable reaction from the other passengers, Stefan grabbed his leather roll of tools off the luggage rack, then his shoulder bag. He slung one over each shoulder and hurried aft to the closest exit. By the time the 2 Gestapo in the next car had doubled back, and the one with Stefan's papers realized something was amiss, Stefan had disembarked from the train and made his way into central Hamburg, concealed and abetted by its throngs of pedestrian traffic. As an escape, well-timed, even artful, but it left Stefan without papers, in the heart of enemy territory, a great distance from his destination. To his chagrin, his only reliable means of reaching Poland now was to do so on foot and under cover of darkness. So much for traveling in style. He adjusted the roll-up, which contained his tools of the art, and his satchel, which held his clothes and personal effects. And he was grateful that Adair had encouraged him to travel light. His path had grown longer and more perilous than it had been just an hour earlier, yet his thoughts now were dominated by one pragmatic regret. Had I known I'd be walking to Poland, I'd have worn more comfortable shoes. Avenues, boulevards, buildings, and monuments, all were nothing but outlines on a pale canvas of knee-high snow. Only the weaving paths of tire tracks and the broad cuts of Panzer's treads marred the shroud that blanketed the city of light. Trudging down a rue in the 9th arrondissement, Nico pulled his scarf over his nose as much for warmth as for anonymity. In the weeks since he had waded ashore at Carentek after crossing the English Channel in a skiff piloted by a besotted old Welshman, he had hiked from one town or village to the next, always under the cover of darkness. Along the way, he had seen enough of the Germans' atrocities to know he needed to avoid being noticed in occupied France. Just as Adair had warned, his adopted home had come to feel strange and hostile. In a country village, he had seen SS troops execute 2 boys for stealing a loaf of bread. On a road outside of Saint-Suzanne, he had borne silent witness from the woods as a squad of Wehrmacht opened fire on a dairy truck that had refused to stop at their command. When the soldiers searched its wreckage, all they had found was a young woman in an apron, a pool of milk and cream from a dozen shattered bottles, 50 pounds of bullet-ridden cheese. Nico pulled his arms to his sides and quickened his step. An hour earlier, after he'd crossed the Pont de la Concorde, he'd noticed a crowd of anglers stooped over the railings along the right bank, their lines casted to the Seine. Nico couldn't remember ever having seen so many people try to fish the river at once, so he paused long enough to ask an elderly gent, "Any luck?" The old fisherman looked at him with sunken eyes. He wore a dense stubble of white whiskers on his gaunt cheeks. as much as one would expect. Attuned then to the crowd's air of desperation, Nico had nodded and moved on. At the midpoint of his climb up the tiered steps of the Rue Foyette, he passed a squad of German soldiers. A half-dozen Nazis shouted anti-Semitic slurs as they beat a frail, elderly man and woman under one of the steps' lampposts. The Germans paid Nico no mind as he drifted past, his chin down and his eyes averted in fearful shame from the spectacle unfolding in plain sight on the steps of Montmartre's famous Sacré-Cœur Basilica. I am a pilgrim in an unholy land. He shook with rage and suppressed an urge to vomit. The conflict between his impulse to wreak vengeance on the Nazis and his duty to carry out his mission, which required him to remain undetected in enemy territory, stung his eyes with tears. How many must I sacrifice for the greater good? How do I forgive myself for the lives I do not save? Pushing onward, he found no answers and no solace, only distance from the pain. Once he reached the Rue Saint-Eleuthère, he found the streets deserted. The glow of lamplight was dulled by the blizzard, and his steps were muffled by deep snow. He didn't see another soul the rest of his way through Montmartre, and when he reached the Café Étoile on Rue de Cloy, it was, as he had expected, closed, locked, and dark. He tried the adjacent door which led to the apartments above the restaurant. It was unlocked, so he opened it and stepped inside. He passed through the foyer, then climbed the switchback staircase to the third floor. He stopped in front of the door to its only flat and knocked twice with the side of his fist. Thumps, rumblings from the other side, muted voices, anxious whispers. Then the thunk of a deadbolt being retracted. The door cracked open. Through the sliver, Nico spied a tall man who asked with naked suspicion, "What do you want?" It wasn't the greeting Nico had expected. "I'm looking for Camille." From behind the door, he heard a revolver being cocked. The bruiser's one visible eye narrowed. "And who are you?" "Nico, her brother." A flurry of commotion pushed the lunk aside, and the door was pulled wide. Looking at Nico, beaming with joy, was his kid sister, who now was more grown up than he had ever thought possible. "Nico!" Camille threw her arms around him and laughed as she peppered his cheeks with kisses. Pressing her palms to his face, she leaned back. "It's been so long. When the Germans came, I was afraid I'd never see you again." "Don't be silly, Cammy. Even the hordes of hell couldn't keep us apart." Their moment was spoiled by the bruiser. "We should search him." Camille glared at the big man. "You are not searching my brother. You can't trust anyone, not after what happened to Luke and Adele." Nico wanted to enjoy his reunion with Camille, but it was clear he had to cut to business. He stepped inside the apartment. "You mean the Lamarck McKee?" The big man pressed his revolver's muzzle to Nico's forehead. Camille tried to leap between them. "Ferran, don't!" Ferran pushed her aside and kept his stare on Nico. "How do you know that?" "British SOE sent me." A bead of sweat trickled down Ferran's right temple. "Prove it." "The Allies will need help when they come to free Europe from the Nazis," Nico said. "They'll need a strong resistance here in occupied France, a fifth column to pave the way." Ferran pressed the revolver's muzzle harder against Nico's head. "We know that." "Then you know the Nazis have guerrilla units in France pretending to be occult groups. They call themselves the Tula Society. The SOE sent me to wipe them out in the Zona Libre." "The SOE sent one man to fight the Tula cult? I'm not sure I believe you." "Why should I give a damn what you believe?" "Ferran," Camille said, "stop." She nudged Ferran's pistol away from Nico and put a hand to Nico's chest, signaling him to back down. "Nico, Ferran Clippé is my husband." Nico chortled and set down his duffel and tool roll. He rubbed his eyes and sighed before facing his sister and brother-in-law. "A thug, just like Papa. I should have known." Still itching for a fight, Ferran took 2 steps toward Nico. "Oh, pardon me. Was I supposed to get your blessing first? Maybe I would have if you hadn't run off to England." Nico had no patience for an argument with an aggressive crep. He gestured toward the door. "Mr. Clippé, would you mind giving us a few minutes alone, please?" "Yes, I do mind. This is my home. You can't just strut in here like a peacock and..." Give us a few minutes, Nico said, projecting the coercive force of Dentalian. Put down your pistol and take a walk outside. Ferrand froze, struggling between his free will and magical compulsion thrust upon him. Then he set his revolver on the table, walked out the door, and continued down the stairs, leaving Nico alone at last with his younger sister. She radiated disapproval. That was rude. Rude? He put a gun to my head, an offense I would forgive had he not also put a ring on your finger. He lifted her hand to look at her wedding band. What were you thinking? She pulled her hand back, offended. That you were dead, like Mama and Papa. Why would you think that? I wrote you every week, until the Germans took Paris. That's my fault? I'm to blame because the Nazis won't deliver my letters from Britain? She shut the apartment door, then turned and lowered her voice. You don't know what it's been like here since the Germans came. They take most of the food and fuel and make us beg for scraps. A nod toward the kitchen. It's been months since we've had cooking oil. Thin as our ration cards are, most days the markets don't have enough food to fill them. That explains the fishermen on the Sun. The Nazis banned fishing on the coast, she said, to stop men from sailing south to join the Free French. She pulled a chair from the table and sank onto it. The Vichy loyal police and the Nazis arrest hundreds every week. Jews, communists, anyone who looks different or says anything they don't like. Never someone so much as bruises a Nazi, they kill dozens of innocents. She palmed tears from her cheek. We're in hell, Nico. It pained him to see her so frightened, so bereft of hope. A decade earlier, when they had come to Paris as teenage refugees after the deaths of their parents, he had promised to keep her safe. Watching her weep, he knew it was time to honor his vow. He leaned forward and clasped her hands. You are not in hell, and I'll prove it to you. And your prick of a husband, if you'll let me. She studied him with tear-stained eyes. How? I'll help you and Ferrand unite with other resistance groups. Once you all start to work together, you'll find you're stronger than you know. Camille stood. Count me in. She patted his shoulder on her way into the kitchen room. Now, ration stamps be damned. My brother is back from the dead. Must have a wedge of Gruyere and a bottle of Cabernet stashed in here somewhere. I just read about it. So we got about 10 minutes left if anybody would like to ask any questions of either of us. Anything at all?
Are either of these coming out on Audible?
I believe there's a digital audiobook version of this plan, but I don't know if it's on the Audible platform or if it's a Macmillan proprietary.
I think it's going to be.
Yeah, there will be an audiobook version, but it will be direct from the publisher.
And your lovely accents.
Well, it won't be me doing them. There is an audiobook version of the first book, Gray Shade, done by Trendade Sparks, who's a really, really gifted voice actor. And my suspicion is that he'll also do book two. The first one will be out. The audio version of Gray Shade is coming out fairly soon. So the audio version of Renegade will probably not be until next year, but both of those will be available on Audible. Yeah.
David, you mentioned this is the first in a series.
Yes. The Dark Arts series. That's the umbrella title. The first book encompasses 6 years in World War II, 1939 to 1945, in the European theater of war. The second book, which I'm writing right now, is called The Iron Codex, and that's going to take place in 1954. And that's a Cold War spy thriller set against the backdrop of the Red Scare, McCarthyism, the nuclear arms race, and as it turns out, behind the scenes of history, a magical arms race, with lots of cloak and dagger and betrayal and stories of redemption. And the third book under the contract is called The Shadow Commission. It's going to take place in 1963, right after the Kennedy assassination. That's going to be a paranoia conspiracy thriller. So the idea behind the series is that with each book we jump to a different year, a different period of geopolitical history. I try to ground them in some sort of significant or noteworthy event from that period. And the idea is that each book is also a different style of book. I didn't want to just write one war story after another. I didn't want to go Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War. So I decided that the series would reinvent itself with each book. We'd go war epic, Cold War spy thriller, paranoia piece, and if I am so lucky that this sells and finds an audience and people want more, in theory we could go forward and book 4 could be a Hunter S. Thompson drug-fueled road trip about 2 magicians whacked out on Benzedrine and Grappa as they drive to Vegas. Book 5 could be New York in the gritty, awful 70s, when the city's falling apart, and it could be a crime heist thriller. Book 6 could be set in the 80s in Miami about the rise of the drug trade, and everybody's wearing pastels and driving Ferraris. But the idea is to basically hop around to find significant events, turning points in history, milestone moments, and then ground stories either in those moments or build them around those moments. And thankfully, because the characters, due to their use of black magic, age very slowly, my core group of characters that are established in Book 1 will carry forward as the series progresses. So you will follow at least probably the same 2 primary characters and maybe a handful of the same supporting characters as they march through history.
Is the first one out now? Or
The first one comes out January 30th, 2018. It's available now for pre-order. And the great news is it's going to be available in a variety of formats: hardcover, trade paperback, which is this kind of a volume, which is going to be a little more affordable. It'll also be out in audiobook and in a ebook format. So whichever format works best for your budget and your reading style. If you're a collector and you absolutely love to have hardcover first editions, or you know someone who does, there will be hardcover versions available. If you're on a budget and you don't want to spend that kind of money, well, you don't have to wait a year. The trade paperback's going to be out the same day. If you're an e-reader, ebooks are out, and if you prefer audio, they're going to have that too. Yeah, it's a bold marketing strategy, which I am very excited about. I just think it's great because it used to be, a book would come out hardcover, and if you didn't have $28 to spend or $27 to spend on a book, you had to wait a year for the trade paperback edition. And now with them coming out on the same day, it's like everybody can get what they want at the same time.
Yep.
And so it avoids the veto vote.
Yeah, that's good.
Any other questions for Greg? Questions about the world? Trivia?
Personal anecdotes?
Questions about the magic system?
I got this thing growing on my shoulder.
All right, I'll throw a question your way.
Oh, sure.
I have a question about how you got the idea for this in the first place.
Well, originally I was trying to write something that would combine modern day techno thriller with black magic.
Okay.
And a lot of the inspiration came from a 1960s James Blish novel called Black Easter. That was where I got the idea of using the Renaissance era black magic this way.
Yep.
As I was trying to craft that story, I kept trying to concoct a villain who was this great horror from the past that had its roots in World War II, and it was re-emerging in the 21st century. But I found that I kept needing to explain more about what this was in World War II and why it was relevant. And eventually I realized that the B story was starting to take over. And at some point I just realized, well, obviously that's what I want to write.
Yeah.
I want to write the World War II story.
Yeah.
And the 21st century story, I just said, I'm going to let it go. Clearly that's not coming together for me. But I think there's a great epic story. And part of what I love about the World War II era is that it really does represent a turning point in human history. It's a point where if it had gone the other way, the whole world would be different. So the idea of having these characters who are swept up in this moment, like we're not only at the beginning of the war, we have the whole 6 years of the war in Europe. Not to spoil anything, but the main character gets to be part of the horror that is D-Day. And I don't pull any punches on that. And because it's secret history rather than alt history, I feel like it makes it feel more relevant and more immediate because you can almost believe that this is taking place behind the scenes of the world we live in.
Sure.
And to achieve that verisimilitude, like I did so much research, like the D-Day boats, I found out, like I learned the numbers on every landing boat that landed on every port of the beach. I made sure I got the right numbers on the right boats. I got down to like the troop level, like I found out what the names of the lieutenants were. So there's a lot of real people and real names and real events that are referenced throughout the book.
That's pretty neat. It reminds me a little bit of an early, like, Mike Cole was doing some things about the military magic, but later, yeah. But I mean, obviously, it's modern, not sort of historical.
Yeah, his Shadow Ops was actually, I think it was a little more almost like X-Men.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Meets Military. This is more almost like Harry Potter goes to war. It's like Harry Potter works with demons instead of, mangled Latin.
Yeah, right. Right, that's cool.
So we're down to our last 3 minutes before they want us to get out. I guess I'll just say thank you, everybody, for coming and for listening to us read.
Same, and I have a couple of, I have about just 2 of these left that I brought with me. I brought a few of these, and a bunch of these are sold, which is wonderful. But if anyone is interested in the first book, I have a couple left to sell. If you find me around, you might be able to get those. If you want to see before what happens to the guy that you heard about at the very end of that introduction of Renegade, what happens to him. So.
Okay.